Let's talk about griefers in EVE Online by telling a true story of how our corp dealt with them. And the story begins with this fight between two players in Minmatar Thrasher class destroyers.
See that explosion? Yeah, I'm in lowsec. I'm killing serpentis rats in lowsec. Stupid NPCs can't hurt me. Pretty badass, right? Got a little bit of shield damage, but I'll be alright. Wait, who's this? Is somebody trying to attack me? Another player? What the?
But I don't think he's there.
Oh, he wants to fight? I'll tell him to stop. I got shield damage. Stop, bro. Stop it. Stop. Oh no. You're gonna actually fight me when I have shield damage? You're gonna fight? No. It wasn't a good fight, bro.
Now, shortly after this fight, the aggressor visited our public recruitment chat, and I actually found him to be friendly, so I was friendly in return. But CJ Mansfield, the one who lost the fight, and unfortunately one of our own, continued to be angry about how the fight went. Wu-Tang, who was CJ's friend, was also a bit unfriendly to the guest in our Booty Tiki bar. Some of you may remember Wu-Tang from the last EVE story video I did several months ago. Anyway, the next day after this interaction, we found our Exploration Corp, which was at the time the best Exploration Corp in EVE, under a lawful declaration of war by Shattered Sanity Alliance. This was an alliance that outnumbered us and seemed to be dedicated to PvP. This meant that in about 24 hours, anyone from either corporation could fight the other, even in high security space, without the intervention from the all-powerful Concord police force. And at first glance, this meant big trouble for us. You see, Shattered Sanity Alliance is what is called a griefing corp in EVE Online, meaning they would go around looking for what seems to be easy victims in a war, encouraged by whiners who lose fights, like the aforementioned CJ Mansfield, so that they can have some easy PvP kills. We're going to talk about what transpired during this war, and why it may have been the most intense gaming experience I have ever had, and you might learn some valuable lessons from my experiences here. But first we have to go back a bit and explain the nature of our corporation, Interstellar Booty Hunters, and why the griefers might have committed a major miscalculation. Although it is true that our corp was not a committed PvP corporation, in fact, some of our losses were expensive ships with bling weapons and modules. Pretty embarrassing, really. We did have some things going for us. We were relatively rich compared to most in EVE, so we could afford decent ships and kit. We were also fairly well skilled, both in player skill points and just playing EVE. We were not miners, like most victims of griefers, but loot hunters, gained mostly from starship combat-oriented PvE, so we understood how to fly our ships and use the weapons well. And some of us did have a bit of PvP experience, especially myself. However, as told in previous videos, there were still divisions within our 50-plus member corp. Some of us explored alone, some of us teamed up for lowsec adventures. Now I myself was learning how to bait aggressive idiots into fights they shouldn't take by stealing their loot and then killing them after they actually attack me. Hey, this is self-defense, right? But few others seem to be interested in this fine art. In fact, a few of us were indulging in what I believe is the lowest form of PvP there is, suicide ganking miners, and then shit-talking in local. I'll explain. Miners who fly mining barges in high sec are perhaps the lowest EVE player in the food chain, but in many ways the most important. Although it is true that if you attack these weak mining barges in high sec, the Concord police will show up and certainly blow up your ship. But in systems with a security rating of 0.6 or 0.5, it takes about 20 seconds for Concord to show up. This is plenty of time to use a high damage output destroyer and kill a weakly tanked mining barge. But for what? Not much, just a little bit of ore that you might take from the barge wreck. And for some gankers like, yes, CJ and Wu-Tang, you talk shit to them in local and troll them and hope to get a reaction out of them. CJ in particular would continue to argue with them after killing their ship. Are we starting to notice a pattern here? After going with them on a suicide gank myself, my statement was, not really much skill to this form of PvP, is there? And I also concluded and told them that this was not really the direction I wanted to take Booty. If these guys wanted PvP, I had something else in mind if they could handle it. In a previous video, I mentioned our very first war against the similarly named Booty Hunters, rather than Interstellar Booty Hunters. And in that war, we lost one ship due to falling asleep on a gate, and had one inconclusive fight. I decided we should declare war on Booty Hunters ourselves, but only this time we would be on the offense with twice their numbers. What I didn't know is that this aggressive war deck from Shattered Sanity Alliance would disrupt those plans. Nowadays, declaring war on EVE is a little bit harder. To declare war on EVE, you must have a player-owned Citadel station that you can designate as a war headquarters, and the people you declare war on must also have a player-owned station. CCP made this change to the game in an effort to protect newer players from this very situation of war deck griefing. They also removed the ability to see when players were online with the watch list. It could be argued that these two changes may have hurt a lot of content generation that used to occur with the old war deck system, and this war I'm talking about now may have never occurred with the current system, at least not as easily, but I will let you be the judge of this after telling the rest of the story. Anyway, after receiving this war deck, we had two options. We could go underground and scatter. We could avoid major trade hubs. Some of us could dock up and deny them kills or content until they got bored in a week when the war deck automatically expires. Or we could fight. I conferred with a couple of friends who were more experienced PvPers than I before making this decision. One of them was Beta Page, someone known in the exploration community, but he was also known for pretty good bait PvP, scamming, and spying. He was like, "You guys are crazy to fight since Shattered Sanity had about 70 members to our 50, and most of us were not dedicated PvPers. Whereas Shattered Sanity seemed to do nothing but war deck others and grief them in PvP, mostly in highsec. But the more aggressive people in our corp were trying to get into PvP in what I viewed as a semi-toxic way, and we were planning on war decking Booty Hunters anyway, so I decided that we were going to fight. My thinking was that if we did not fight, we would be the victims of one griefing corp after another, and Beta Page was going to be our spy. After making this decision, I was nervous as hell, almost to the point of panic. But it was to be. Our war deckers were based mostly out of the Galinti trade hub system of Dodixie, so I asked everyone to move their combat ships to the neighboring system of Alvergne, which had connections to other systems that surrounded Dodixie. We weren't interested in holding up defensively, but outmaneuvering any of them that tried to leave Dodixie along the major trade routes. It was also time to come up with a unified fleet doctrine. If we showed up in a variety of ships with no unified tactic, we wouldn't be very effective. At our level of PvP, simplicity was best, so I decided we were going to go brawly. This meant stasis webifiers to slow them down, warp scramblers to prevent warp, and lots of short-range DPS. So we're talking about mostly blaster ships like the Brutix, the Thorax, maybe some Vectors here and there, with the simple tactic of everyone seizing and tackling the enemy ships at close range where we could maximize damage and destroy them. At that time, as well as later in my EVE career, I found that enforcing a particular doctrine is not always easy. Next, Pariatus, a good friend who is intelligent and experienced, would not shut up about battleships. I saw battleships as less versatile and a lot more expensive compared to cruisers and battlecruisers. Battleships would be more of a final step of escalation in highsec, but not a card that I wanted to play in the beginning. Wu-Tang wanted to try Navy hookbill frigates, which was fine, but it kind of lacked the DPS and punch, as we kept seeing our opponents in ships as large as battleships. On top of that, he wanted to fleet command this hookbill composition. In spite of his intelligence and ability to really rally people, I'd seen him command PvE fleets which were a drunken, disorganized mess, and a good fleet commander he was not. I did kind of let him know this privately. Our enemies also staged in the lowsec system nearby. It has been a while, so I cannot remember the exact name of it, but they actually had an old-style control tower. This was the type of starbase that was around before citadels were implemented in EVE. These were the only thing resembling player-owned stations at that time. Its purpose was unknown to us. Although for those that do not know, a low security system is free of Concord police, meaning that even without a war deck, PvP can occur freely there. Of course, this didn't matter much in the case of a legal declaration of war. It would be rather important later on. It was as if these griefers might have also been trying to become a real lowsec pirate alliance. Well, we would see about that. This is where, thankfully, both Beta Page and I agreed that psychological warfare was important. I decided to bring one of Beta Page's alts into our corp as a permanent consultant. I knew this might not last given Beta's wild nature, but I was grateful for the temporary help nonetheless. I put my alt, Eggshan Lopan, inside the lowsec system in a cloaked ship to do nothing but watch silently. The war targets would know he was there in the system by seeing him in local chat. They would not know where he was, what he was doing, only that he was there watching. He would stay there throughout most of the war. This is where the beginning of some real internal contention among us appeared, because certain factions in my corp were anxious to shit-talk opponents in local chat. I forbade it. Instead, we would be totally silent. No matter what they said to us, we would say nothing, and we would be frighteningly mysterious. Believe me, this tactic worked. This did rattle them. Of course, it would take some discipline to enforce this policy, and the final problem was that Wu-Tang and CJ did not trust or like Beta Page at all. Well, I decided they would have to deal with it. Now at this time I did work during the day in real life. When I was gone, apparently our corp formed themselves into a pretty good fleet ranging from 6 to 10 people. It was not the brawly doctrine I had prescribed, but a variety of ships. The only problem was that this fleet was a waste of time because the war targets were mostly US time zone and would not be on until later, so this fleet was pretty much flying around aimlessly and doing nothing for hours, just fleeting. I came online to find this fleet had formed up, with Wu-Tang more or less in charge. This was okay, as it was almost the right time for our war targets to come online, but because of the timing, there was nothing to engage until the coming hours. Wu-Tang wanted to disband the fleet and send everyone away since they had gotten nothing so far. I did not. I said no. We would take a little break, but things were about to really get started. The fleet stands. Wu-Tang suddenly got upset with me and started popping off over comms. So I took it to a private chat, and I let him know that talking back this time wouldn't be tolerated. I was the CEO. He was not, and my decisions once made were final. I decided that we were going to fight, not disperse as soon as they start to log on. And then the cussing cascade began. Shortly thereafter, he had dropped out of our corp. I let everyone know that Wu-Tang had quit in a rage, but it was time to start fitting and shipping into our brawly ships like I had planned. And yes, I was flustered. I had just been cussed out by one of my friends in the game, and one that many people knew and loved, but the same patterns couldn't continue. I forced myself to move on in my head and focus on what was to come. And then, according to our watch list, the war targets started to log in, one by one, probably unaware that we were already more or less forming nearby. While bringing in a Brutix combat battlecruiser into Alvergne, Crokite, an Italian player, suddenly found himself engaged by an enemy Rattlesnake-class battleship. To be sure, a Rattlesnake is a very formidable and expensive battleship that can chuck lobs of heavy missiles at you. Two more of us were one jump away in Brutix-class battlecruisers, fit to brawl with high DPS blasters. We had to get there to save Crokite, or he would certainly go down. Sidonius, a cool-headed player from Malta, arrived next and started pouring on blaster fire. I arrived last, and by the time I arrived, the Rattlesnake stopped shooting. You see, the battle took place outside a station, and this is Station Games 101. If the situation gets too hot, you can dock back up in the station for safety, but there is a 1-minute lockout timer after any aggressive action. So the Rattlesnake stopped shooting, turned off all offensive modules, and tried to tank our DPS while the aggression timer counted down, hoping that he would be able to dock in time. But 3 Brutixes laying on all that blaster fire was just too much, and the Rattlesnake went down. A huge kill mail at the start of the war. I felt so vindicated at this point. Even Wu-Tang admitted that it was a very nice kill. Our war targets said, well, he needed to lose that Rattlesnake anyway. Meanwhile, I got my first spy report from Beta Page, a look inside the Griefing Corps. Beta was great at his job. According to him, they were not unified, they did not come across as skilled, and they were like a bunch of obnoxious frat boys. The cultural differences between us and them were pretty stark. Our corp was not as active on voice comms as I'd liked, but we were when it counted. They were always on voice comms. Our corp was polite and more or less civil to each other. They were not really, and one or two of them were already extremely nervous about us. Thanks to some spying in my cloaked ship in lowsec, we saw what might be an opportunity. The war targets were attacking someone's control tower in that lowsec system with attack battlecruisers. Now, attack battlecruisers can fit battleship-sized weapons, but they didn't have anywhere near the tank of a battleship. With their high damage output, they were a popular choice for the grind of killing space structures. They would be at this for a couple of days. You see, after the first attack, after taking so much damage, if fueled properly, the structures become invulnerable, but only for a day or two, a mechanic designed to give any defenders time to mount a defense. The owners of this structure did not seem to be active or much of a threat. So we began to consider how we can attack these battlecruisers the next time they attack the structure. Beta came up with a simple, cheap solution: gank-fit catalysts. We could pounce on them with a small swarm of high DPS catalyst-class destroyers. This could probably take the battlecruisers apart if everyone was fast about it. The war targets probably wouldn't be paying much attention since they were in the structure-bashing grind zone, and even if they did manage to kill some catalysts, it wouldn't compare to the more expensive loss of just a couple of those attack battlecruisers. I liked the plan and approved it. Unfortunately, I could not be in charge of it, as I was coming down with something, and I needed to sleep. And this is where I made the first major mistake. I decided to leave CJ Mansfield in charge of the operation. Yes, the very one who cried like a baby after losing the fight in his Thrasher before this war began. The next day I get into the game and Beta Page is saying to me that there was a major diplomatic incident and falling out. In a stupor I listened. CJ had apparently snapped at Beta while preparing for the op and told him to get off comms and get out of the corp. Then he promptly called off the entire thing in a cussing rage. Great, just what I needed. But my hope was that without Wu-Tang's influence, CJ would start to settle down a bit and become a competent director, maybe even a fleet commander. Instead, CJ put out a mail to several people saying that he had just lost his best friend in Eve and that he was upset. Meaning Wu-Tang, best friend? They had known each other for all but 3 weeks, and they were apparently best friends. What compounded the issue is that apparently while they were preparing, Nex continued to go on and on about battleships, and there was something of a debate about whether to take actual battleships out there to lowsec. So my position on this was that I left CJ in charge. I trusted the plan of Beta's, but the op ultimately failed because of petty paranoia. In spite of all of this, we were more or less getting our shit under control. We took advantage of the narrow slivers of time between time zones to destroy their ships in detail. We would use interceptors to catch them when they tried to leave Dodixie. We would camp their lowsec system, kind of like a reverse gate camp in highsec, and catch them on their way back to Dodixie. Sometimes they had less experienced members wandering away from Dodixie, and we would catch and destroy them. Even Beta was slightly impressed. He reported that they were very paranoid about spies and scared of us. There was only one problem. A week came and went, and they renewed the war deck. It's as if their pride was hurt. And rather than getting back to our normal exploration and ISK making, we would have to endure this war for another week. Plus, there was the betrayal incident. And I will get to that in our next video. So subscribe and hit the notification bell, share this video if you can. If this does well, it will be incentive to get the next part of the series out sooner. So please subscribe, like, share, and comment for the algorithm. Until next time, space friends.